little backstory to fill you all in on what's been happening. I'll start this off with the fact that I believe I've been haunted from some of my earlier memories. There have always been unexplainable sounds, shadows, or figures in the corner of the eye. As I got older, I'm 21 and male, I started to get used to these things since I could never confirm these things for sure, and they never seemed to try to harm me in any way. Hell, I could have just been seeing and hearing things out of paranoia for all I knew. But these last 2 weeks, the activity has quickly ramped up since my roommate had been on vacation. I was accustomed to hearing things, but I could always blame it on my cat or dog. But Sunday night, I was in my room watching YouTube on the PS4. I was in a party with my friend, just talking. I then heard a very distinct "why" come from the outside of my cracked door. I'm staring at the opening as every hair on my body stands on end. My friend then says, "Hey, who was that?" That prompted me to jump out of bed and get my knife. I'm explaining to my friends that I had no idea who that was, and I think someone's in my house. The whole time, I'm fixed on this cracked open door, with a terrible feeling that something bad is about to happen any second. Then suddenly, the bad feeling is gone, and I gather my courage and rush into the hallway and turn on the light. I didn't see anything. I search the rest of the house and see nothing. He said he heard it, and we both came to the conclusion it had to be my cat making a weird noise. He makes weird ones all the time, but never like that, but I was ready to leave it at that. 2 days later, Tuesday night, I'm watching YouTube again, this time with the door locked and closed. It was open because it gets hot in my room if the door's closed, but I didn't care. I was spooked. So I'm watching a pro game match, and at the end of the video, they add time to it to keep you from guessing the winner of the match early by looking at the time left in the video. I ended up dozing off pretty early in the video, and I wake up some time later, and I'm just listening to the match for a few minutes to see how everything is going. I realized I'd never get back to sleep if I kept listening, so I decided to turn off the TV and go to bed. I turn around, eyes closed because I didn't want to wake up fully, and find the remote on the nightstand and try to turn it off. It wasn't working, so I figured I left the controller in front of the sensor again and prepare myself to open my eyes in an exaggerated fashion. When I open them, I see this figure standing in front of the TV. I couldn't tell if it was looking at the TV or at me. It looked like a black stick figure, but a full head of long, straight black hair. It was probably about 4 feet tall. In utter shock, I just laid there, looking at this thing. Time goes on, and it doesn't move a muscle, and neither did I. I felt like if I moved, something bad would happen, so I continued to stare at the back or front of its head, not sure where it was looking. A few minutes go by, and I realize the match is complete and the black screen is about to pop up in the next few minutes. I had no idea what I should do. It had been about 10 minutes since I'd noticed this thing, and it hadn't moved an inch, but my fear only increased. Out of panic, I called it out. I screamed, "Who are you?" I got no response. It continued just standing there. I'm still not sure what it's looking at. At this point, I could no longer bear to look at it. I closed my eyes and rolled back over, turning my back to it. In the next few minutes, the match was over and it was silent. I heard no sound of it moving, but I once again had the feeling if I turned to look, I would regret it. So I laid there, pretending to be asleep while every sense was on high alert. I was starting to think it was gone when I had this overwhelming sense of presence, like something was standing right behind me. I then felt little pricks on the side of my face that's not on the pillow. It felt like hair. The mental image I came up with from this information almost caused me to start bawling. I started to think like I was going to die, but I didn't want to look at it. I was afraid of what I would see, so I laid there, still as a corpse, and I heard a faint "Alice," and the feeling vanished just like that. Still stricken with fear, I didn't dare open my eyes. I ended up falling back to sleep. I'm not sure what I did to cause this to suddenly start getting so serious.
I should preface this by saying that I usually don't believe paranormal stories that much. I usually think people are misremembering, or whatever happened had a logical but boring explanation. But this is my experience, and I have no idea what happened. So, I just woke up, I opened my eyes, and it being around 4 in the morning, it was dark, and above me, blocking the faint light from the edge of my curtains, was a person staring. I was filled with this weird animalistic fear that I'd never felt before. I think they were in one of those spandex suits because I couldn't make out any of their facial features. Its head was pointed up but clearly looking at me, and it kept moving its head in this jittery pattern. I tilted my head slightly on accident, and the thing scuttled back in what I guess was supposed to be a surprise or fear, and I could hear it sliding across my sheets. I stood perfectly still if this was a robber, and I didn't want to think I was awake. But I did have my eyes open. But I guess it couldn't see them in the dark, or maybe it just didn't care. It seemed to ease up and move forward back to where it was. I had my mouth slightly open, and being satisfied that I was asleep, or at least invalid, it ran its index finger across the wire in my front 2 braces. I could feel its finger against my mouth occasionally. It touched my lips with its finger on accident. It didn't feel right. Well, not that a stranger's finger in your mouth could ever feel right, but it didn't feel like a finger. Like it was in a glove, but I could feel its fingernail. It kept looking at me with this jittery motion, and I kept opening and closing my eyes hoping it would leave, or at least that I would fall asleep. When I realized that it would not be leaving, and it probably being dangerous, I thought to attack it. I felt a rush of adrenaline and ready to strike, but I didn't thought that was smart. I wanted to attack it, strangle it, whatever I could do, but it had the advantage being above me and all. I suddenly realized that I couldn't feel its weight on the mattress, and in that moment I knew that it couldn't be a robber. I don't know if this was sleep paralysis. I'd only had it once before, but I couldn't even move my fingertips or toes at that time. Not even my head. But here I was, struggling to keep still. I decided that the best that I could do is wait. I'm not much of a theologian, but when I was out of options, I just prayed. I shut my eyes and eventually I felt its finger retract from my mouth, and it left. I sat in my bed not moving for a few hours until there was enough light. Eventually I got up the courage to turn on the lights in my room, and surprise, surprise, there was nothing there. So I don't really know that much about the paranormal, and I have heard of and had sleep paralysis though, but this time I could move more than the one time I experienced it. Plus, I didn't have any hallucinations that time. Also, Part of the reason I think this might be paranormal was because last night in my bathroom, there was a loud bang. It was so loud that my parents came to see if something broke, but there wasn't anything there. So thank you for paying at least limited attention to me. And if you know what's up, please help.
I saw this when I was a teenager, and it has defined my life. I even went and got a physics degree to understand the world around me, in hopes that I would know where to start figuring this out. But I'm lost. In a town near Portland, Oregon, at about 7 to 8 p.m, on an overcast, dark night in 2006 or so, I saw a shadowy entity in a driveway across the street. I was playing World of Warcraft at the time. I recall I was playing my warlock, and I had positioned my computer so the window out of my second-story room was looking down on the tea of my neighbors because I liked the view. I saw a flicker in my eye and looked across the street to the driveway of my neighbor's house. They had 4 cars in the driveway when they normally only had 1 or 2, and only the porch light was on, not the driveway floodlights that they had above the garage door. It was a 2-car garage with cement stairs leading up to the left of the driveway to the main door. I saw something moving between the cars, but I couldn't make out any limbs or identifying features because it was so dark. In this area at night, when it's overcast, it gets extremely dark, almost pitch black, so it wasn't strange to me that I couldn't identify it. It just seemed like a person walking between the cars, and seemed like an average height at least. Well, then it sped up. Across maybe 5 seconds or so, it went from walking speed to running speed to maybe 30-ish miles an hour, zooming around all 4 cars in the driveway before it disappeared entirely. When it started speeding up to about bike riding speed, all of the lights started flickering in all of the cars. These were older cars. I recall an old maroon 4-door Civic car, not a car I would expect had a fob or ability to flash like that while it was off. Even the floodlight above the garage was flickering, lighting up the entire area. This thing was moving so fast I couldn't tell what it was, but it was just shadow. Even with light, I couldn't see anything but blackness. Then, the house lights, even inside the house, all of the lights flickered, not unison at all over several seconds, before everything just clicked back to normal and it was done. The period between on and off wasn't consistent at all either. It was seriously like flickering lights in cliché ghost scenes. They weren't strobe lights or anything, rather flickering on and off maybe a few times a second. Come to think of it though, both the left and right car headlights did flicker in unison for the 4 cars, just the cars differed between each other. And granted, I think it's possible to come up with a contraption to make car lights activate from afar. Electricity in high voltage scenarios can be insane. However, I have no reason to think they were performing any similar experiment. And I markedly saw a black shadow-like thing going between the cars pretty quick before the lights started at all. The timeline is something like 0 to 1 seconds. I see a black thing moving between the cars at walking pace. Thought it was a person. 1 to 2 seconds, it walks towards the front of the driveway between the cars, and I'm a bit more confused. 2 to 3 seconds, it starts gliding around the cars like at a bicycle speed. 3 to 4 seconds, it accelerates and lights start flickering. 4 to 5 seconds, everything's going crazy. I don't know where it is, I just see a stream of shadow at this point, like a fast game of Snake, and right at 5 seconds, everything snaps back to normal. I stared for a while after that. Nothing. I had no explanation, and to this day, I regret never going over there and asking the neighbors if they saw anything too. I didn't know them, and I was only about 16 at the time. I just told my mum, who told me weird stuff happens. I went on to get a bachelor's degree in physics actually, to see if I could find anything that made sense to fit my new worldview, and that was basically one big intro to a whole many more questions than I ever anticipated. I've thought through a multitude of possibilities, the most logical being a hallucination, but to my knowledge, I've never hallucinated before then or since, nor did anyone else around me hallucinate or have any strange symptoms, so I rule out carbon monoxide poisoning. I see other people stating that they have seen shadow people, but I'm not sure this was a person. Definitely don't know if it had a hat to be a hat man. And it seems that normal accounts of shadow people don't have them zooming around things and making lights flicker. And now, I'm a father. I have a wonderful wife and a great job, but this still takes up immense real estate in my head.
This is something that happened last night. It was midnight, or right around there anyway, and a friend and I had decided to take a drive to a haunted historic cemetery not too far from where we were at that time, Batstow. On our way there, the cool nighttime wind was practically screaming in our ears as we drove down the peaceful road leading towards the graveyard. I'd say it was about 60 degrees, just based on the temperature on our phones after the fact. With the top of the Jeep off, we were able to smell everything. The beauty of nature surrounding us was pure bliss, filling our noses with varying scents such as basil, salt water, freshly pollinated plants. It was heaven. The only thing along the way that brought us some sense of discomfort was a cop car that we saw at the side of the road, a couple miles down from our destination. The entrance to the village cemetery appeared to our left after we had been driving for probably about 15 minutes, give or take. Making sure no one was following us, we pulled into the driveway and took a spot on the left, facing the trees opposite to the burial grounds. Upon stepping out of the vehicle, everything felt generally fine. But as soon as we entered the graveyard, however, the energy changed drastically. It was like night and day. My friend, who is significantly more experienced in this area than I am, and I immediately started feeling surrounded by an unfathomable amount of presences. Supposedly, he even caught glimpses of several while gazing around the field before us, out of the corner of his eye, and some even head-on. I, unfortunately, did not. There were two paths. The one we were on at this point in time was the one farther from the road. On this path, despite the various entities my friend was catching and the unsettling stillness in the air around us, the energy was pretty neutral. Nothing bad, just eerie. After a little while, we decided we wanted to check out the other path, the one closer to the street, and before we could make it there, the cop car passed by, and as we saw it slow to a halt through the trees in the far distance, its lights began to flash. We checked, and it was even farther away than we had believed. We pressed on, now beginning on that path, more cautiously than before so as not to get arrested for trespassing. Up to this point, we had been using his cell phone to both record and light up the way. This time around, however, we ditched that idea after we were maybe like 10 yards in, if that. The next section is where it gets a little weird. As soon as we turned the light off, things felt off, incredibly off. The air was heavy and much more still than before. At that point, I already wanted out of there as soon as humanly possible. There was this overwhelming feeling of dread that I have never felt before, not so intensely anyway. This feeling that if we didn't get out of there right away, something terrible was going to happen, and I have never been so terrified in my life as far as I can recall. Just a few seconds later, I saw my friend's breath in the air. Again, it was 60 degrees. There was no way that I should have been able to see his breath. And to confirm my paranoia, just a few seconds later, my friend looked towards me, and I watched his face just drop as he noticed that he could see mine as well. We agreed that we needed to get out of there, and so we sprinted as if our lives depended on it to his Jeep. Luckily, we hadn't gotten farther into the woods due to our laying low. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened. But the whole time we were being chased, something was right up on us the whole time, a looming shadow of sheer terror waiting for one of us to fall or something so it could do whatever it was trying to do. On the ride back, things were still heavy, like the entity was trying to come home with us. The entire time, my friend kept saying that he wanted to go back there, and if it weren't for some of the things that I've read in this community, I think we probably would have gone back, which would have been abysmally awful. So, thanks for that, strangers. It was trying to lure us in. I am a firm believer of that, and for the duration of the ride, at least until we finally got off the road we took to get there and made onto a major highway, we could not smell a thing. This was odd, considering that this area was the area that smelled so strongly and beautifully just an hour or so prior. Personally, I believe that this was the demon trying to bring us back to the cemetery with it. I can't think of any logical explanation, especially since my friend doesn't scare easily and was convinced that it was one, and the worst one he's ever encountered in his years of paranormal experiences. If anyone would care to offer any sort of real-world, non-paranormal explanation for this, please do. I am all ears, and I'd like to be proven wrong.
I don't have many memories of my father because he died when I was just 8 years old. However, I do clearly remember the night several years later when he let us know that he was still around and still watching over us. First of all, you need to know something about my father. He was fascinated by the supernatural and by the possibility of some sort of existence after death. After it became clear that he would soon lose his battle with lymphatic cancer, he told my mother not to worry. If there's any way for me to reappear after I die to let you know that I'm okay, he said to her, then that's what I'm going to do. I'll visit you and the kids all the time. It's gonna be so cool. My mother said her response to that was a pointed and succinct, "Don't you dare." It wasn't that she didn't care what happened to him after he died, or that she didn't want him watching over us. She just knew she wasn't going to be emotionally capable of dealing with that situation, and she promised him that's how she would react. My father followed through on his promise though. The story my mother told us was that she was in their upstairs bedroom a few months after his death, thinking about him and crying because she missed him so much. Then, she suddenly had a distinct feeling that she was being watched. She turned her head and saw my father standing outside the bedroom window on the balcony, clear as day. He looked healthy and alive. He was wearing a bright blue suit, and he gave my mother a look that said, "Is it okay if I come inside?" My mother said she stared at him for a moment in total shock. She deliberately blinked her eyes to make certain that she was really seeing what she was seeing, and when she opened her eyes, he was still there, smiling and waiting. That's when my mother followed through on her promise. She closed her eyes tightly and said out loud, "I can't handle this. I'm sorry, but I need you to go away, and please don't ever do this again." After about 10 seconds, she opened her eyes, and this time he was gone. This next part of the story takes place a few years later, and I have to set the scene for you. I took a bad fall while playing soccer, and the impact totally destroyed my shoulder. I broke it in 2 places, and every ligament and tendon was torn. The reason this is important to the story is this. My shoulder hurt so bad that I couldn't easily walk up the stairs to my bedroom, which was across the hall from my parents' bedroom. I was temporarily sleeping in the guest bedroom downstairs, and my brother had the bedroom we shared all to himself. That bedroom was right above the guest bedroom. In the hallway outside the guest bedroom, there was a sideboard with shelves on top and drawers below, and on those shelves was an old mantel clock. It looked a lot like someone cut off the very top of the part of a typical grandfather clock, and it was small enough to fit neatly on the shelf. The clock had to be wound every so often with a special key, which was kept in one of the drawers below, and when it was properly wound, the small pendulum would swing back and forth to keep the clock going. My dad loved this clock, and while he was still alive, he made sure to wind it so that it never stopped. After his death though, my mother never wound the clock again, and it eventually stopped. So this clock had been completely silent for years. Late one night, I was trying to go to sleep, but the pain of my injured shoulder was keeping me awake. Plus, as a kid, I had terrible anxiety. Even with the bedroom door closed to help me feel more secure, I wasn't comfortable sleeping in the unfamiliar surroundings of the guest bedroom and being the only person downstairs. Just as I was finally thinking I might be able to sleep, I heard something in the hallway outside the bedroom door. I was immediately freaked out and wide awake because my mother and my brother were still upstairs. The stairs in this house were very squeaky, and I knew for a fact that I had not heard anyone walk down them. It sounded as though someone or something was messing around with the sideboard. First, I heard the drawer open and then shut. After that, I heard a loud click, followed by a strange sort of grinding sound. Then, there was a couple more clicks, and suddenly, the clock that hadn't made a sound in years started ticking. That sound I heard before wasn't grinding, it was winding. Someone took the key out of the drawer, opened the lock, wound it, and started the pendulum. Apparently, they also put the key back in the drawer where it belonged, because that's where we found it later. At this point, 11-year-old me was not only wide awake, but I was also scared as hell and hiding as far beneath my covers as I could go with a broken shoulder. After all, when you're a child, covers are magical and repel all things evil, right? The next thing I heard was someone walking up the stairs. Then, everything was quiet for a short while. Soon though, I heard footsteps moving around all over upstairs. I even heard someone directly above me open and close the creaky sliding closet door in my bedroom. After that, I clearly heard footsteps come down the stairs, and someone opened and then closed the door to the guest room where I was struggling to breathe inside my deep, dark covers cave. Soon after that, the footsteps returned up the stairs, And finally, all was silent, except for one thing. The clock continued with its relentless tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Eventually, sleep caught up with me, and I didn't wake up until my mother came in to check on me in the morning. While we were eating breakfast that morning, my mother looked at me and paused for a long time. Finally, she asked, "Were you up and walking around last night?" I told her I was not, and then I described to her all the noises I heard. My mother told me that she had heard noises during the night too, and she searched all over the house to see who it was. It was her walking around all upstairs, opening and closing the squeaky closet, coming down the stairs, opening and closing the guest bedroom door, and going back up the stairs again. So, who made the other sounds we both heard first, we wondered, and why was the clock ticking? Suddenly, my mother's eyes grew wide. "Oh my goodness," she said. "Last night was the anniversary of the night your dad died. I think it must have been him trying to let us know that he's still watching over us." And with that, we both went to look at the clock, which was still ticking. "Thanks, Dad. Message received. We love you too, and we miss you."
For about the past year, my boyfriend and I have noticed some really strange things happening at his house. We are both logical, analytical people who are not in touch with the paranormal or metaphysical world, but we have been unable to determine a reasonable explanation for what has occurred. It began on the evening of August 13, 2020. He and I were lying in bed and a floor fan was running. We heard sounds coming from the kitchen, and the noise was loud enough that we both heard it over the fan. I asked if the sound was the dryer, which was located in the kitchen area near the entrance. He said that the dryer wasn't running, and I was concerned that someone might have gotten into the house because I didn't lock the door when I came in. We got up to investigate, but there was no person or animal in the house. The dryer was not running. We were not able to figure out what had caused the noise, but went back to bed. Less than an hour later, we heard what I thought sounded like footsteps in the bonus room upstairs. We went upstairs to investigate, but again, we were unable to determine the cause of the noise. We both felt very uneasy while we were upstairs, and the feeling of uneasiness lasted throughout the night and into the next day. I went back to his house again a couple of days later. To me, the house felt okay until I got near the door to the staircase leading to the bonus room. When he opened the door to the stairs, I immediately got a bad feeling. We went upstairs to look around again, but didn't see anything unusual. After, we went back into the kitchen, and I still had an uncomfortable, uneasy feeling. I didn't know the door to the stairs had been left open, but I could feel that it was open and needed to be closed immediately. I felt somewhat better after I closed the door, but still unsettled. We left an iPhone voice memo app open in the bonus room that night to see if it picked up anything of significance. At points, we could hear distinct tapping and don't know what could have caused those sounds. The following night after I left and throughout the next day, he said that the house felt dead and got a bad feeling near and on the staircase and upstairs. He has lived in the house for more than 10 years and never experienced anything like that. Over the past 10 months, the unsettling feeling has come and gone. There have continued to be noises and objects out of place, and we haven't been able to find a readily apparent explanation for these incidents or the weird feeling we get at times. Early in the morning on Monday, June 14, 2021, a container on his porch was knocked over. An object from inside his house somehow ended up in the yard outside, and some other things were moved or destroyed. He doesn't have a security camera, but the next door neighbor does. Attached are screenshots from between around 2:30 a.m. and 3 a.m. taken from the security video by his neighbor. We haven't seen the actual video yet, but the neighbor says that this figure came from my boyfriend's yard. The figure appears to be very small. For perspective, the gate it's standing beside is only about 3 feet tall. If it were not for the size, generally creepy appearance, and all the other strange things that have happened over the past several months, I would assume it's just a random person wandering around causing trouble. Any thoughts on what this could be? Has anyone else experienced something similar? Any insight would be greatly appreciated.
Seeing things as a kid, most people tend to brush it off as imaginary friends or an overactive imagination. For me, that was what most would always grasp at if something unexplained was mentioned. Ghost tales were taboo. They were the unmentionable topic. Not sure if it was the lack of knowledge or the fact that they were scared of something they truly didn't understand. But just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I want to say I was at least 11 at the time. My parents would always take us to my grandparents' house. My father worked for my grandfather, and they lived out in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing for miles and miles. If you were to scream, nothing would hear you. So when you would visit, it was a guarantee that we were staying a while. They always stuck us kids in the back room. This room was pretty much the storage room of the house. Anything that was to be packed away and out of sight made its way back there. Boxes of old pictures, toys, clothes over the years were all scattered throughout the room. Tall shelves filled with non-perishable items. An extremely tall standing deep freezer took up a decent side of the wall by the door and made enough noise to even wake the dead. There were 2 beds near the back of the room. One was a queen bed that was on a high metal bed frame. Then, next to that, was a small twin bed nudged into the corner. Between these beds was a small nightstand with a touch lamp that sat upon it. Then there was a closet. It was a small and odd little walk-in closet. No clothes were ever hung in there, but there were many more boxes of old knickknacks, vinyls, etc. that seemed to be tossed there and forgotten about. At night, that closet had more than a few boxes of junk in it. I always hated sleeping closest to the closet. I'd have this unnerving feeling like something was waiting to pounce on me at any moment of the night. When the moonlight would shine through the window and hit the boxes just right, it would look like a man in a top hat standing in the very corner of the closet just staring at you. The longer you stared at it, the more it seemed to morph into something more sinister. Usually, there were 3 of us that slept back there, and I was always the oldest. So, me being the oldest, they stuck me closest to the closet, knowing that the other 2 would put up a fight because they were frightened of what was lurking. I'll never forget this one night. It was myself, my cousin, and my younger brother. Hugs and kisses all round, and we were tucked in tight for the night, watching what little light there was disappear along the walls as they closed the door behind them. It was pitch black this night. Couldn't even see your hand in front of your face, it was so dark. Apparently, the moon wasn't shining bright that night, because there were no beams of moonlight peeking in from the window. Laying there, I could hear them turning around, trying to find a comfortable spot to fall asleep. Not long after, snoring. I laid there, glaring into the darkness, uncomfortable as I could ever be. Then I hear a loud crashing noise. Laying there, I'm analyzing where it came from. My cousin's still sound asleep next to me, and I could hear my brother in the bed next to us, snoring. I didn't hear any of the adults come into the room. I sat up in the bed, scanning the dark room, trying to see what made such a loud noise. Then I pan my eyes over to the closet, where, in the back of the closet, I see two red, beady eyes glaring back at me. I gasp and cover myself with my blanket, feeling safe because I can't see whatever was looking at me from under the covers. Just then, the bed starts to shake. The old metal frame is creaking so loud, it wakes my cousin, and I can hear in her voice how scared she was, and she asks me to stop. She's confused and scared, not knowing why the bed is making so much noise and violently shaking back and forth. She reaches over to my side of the bed to see if I was next to her, and she realizes that I'm right there, and she darts straight up in bed, screaming. The bed continues to violently shake for what felt like an eternity. The door then flings open, and then there's light filling the room from one of the parents dashing in to see what's going on. As they made their way to the touch lamp and tapped it, the bed stops. My cousin and myself both looking at each other with such terror and confusion. Our parents didn't even ask what happened, but had assumed we were just goofing around, jumping up and down on the bed and screaming like wild children when it was past our bedtime. They decided to separate us and stuck me in the twin bed in the corner and placed my cousin and my younger brother in the queen bed this time, thinking this would solve our late night shenanigans. We got a lecture, and again with the fading light across the wall as they descended from the room once more. It took some time to finally succumb to my sleepiness. This time, I was woken up by what had felt like hundreds of mice crawling all over me. I was tempted to sit up, but was held down by an unseen force. I couldn't kick, move, or scream for help. I laid there begging for it to stop. Looking down from what I could see was the blanket moving around like there were little creatures running all over me from under the blanket. Then I saw one scramble from under the blanket at my feet. It slowly turned and darted straight for my face. I remember seeing the same red beady eyes from the closet I saw earlier, just running up my body from my feet to my face. I had closed my eyes so tight before it got to my face. I didn't feel the sensation of mice all over my body anymore, but was terrified to even open my eyes. I laid there listening to the room. I gained the courage to open my eyes and saw light coming in from the window outside. It was morning. I sat up in bed, saw them laying in the queen bed beside me, sound asleep. I turned to look towards the closet and see nothing but dusty old boxes and junk. Was it a dream? I'd thought to myself. It wasn't a dream. That was just one night out of many others I had experienced in that back room. It's been years since I've been in that house, and I never plan to go back. I'm not really sure what it was exactly that was in that room, and why it seemed to torture me out of all of us that slept back there. But recently I found out that when my mother was younger, she had the same experiences I had when sleeping in there.
First off, there very well may be logical explanations. My husband and I can't think of any that we haven't ruled out, but we have no clue. We also have neighbors next to and above us, so we don't factor any noises into these experiences because it's more likely to just be neighbors. I don't want to give my location, but we live in one of the most haunted states in the US. I live in a giant apartment building. It's a historic building built in the 1880s and used to be a mill. There are several other buildings in the area built around the same time that have also been converted into apartments. My husband doesn't believe in ghosts, but even he has been a bit freaked out and jokes about it being a ghost. He knows of my past experiences and takes my word for it, but until now, never had anything happen to him that he believed to be paranormal. We've woken up to find cabinets open, but we never leave them open because we have adventurous cats. One night we were in bed. All of a sudden, several things were knocked over from his end table. No animals around, no air circulating like a fan or AC. We weren't even moving. It was like someone swiped these things off of the end table. My husband was actually scared. It's always similar things like this and never malicious. If it is something paranormal, it doesn't harm us, so it's all good. I've been through way worse. I should also mention that I've had some weird instances that I would call premonitions. I don't know for sure, it could be coincidences. Last night, I had a strong urge to check the area that we keep the litter in. There was a candle lit that I forgot about and easily would have stayed on all night. Obviously a hazard. I sensed my cat was going to throw up, so I kept an eye on her. After some time she was fine, so I left her alone, and sure enough, she puked. Things like that, which brings me to today. I needed a shower after work, and to set the scene, it's a small bathroom. The shower is to the right, behind the door if it's open, toilet to the left of it, then a single sink. Next to the sink is a bar where we keep a hand towel on, and I can 100% confirm that it was there. Admittedly, it just hangs there since we use it a lot, but it's important to know. I forgot a towel initially, so I grabbed one and set it on the sink as usual. As I walked in, I looked at the lights above the sink and had that weird feeling of them going out and envisioned it. I turned my music on, set my phone on top of the shelf next to the shower, and then started my routine. I had accidentally set the song to repeat and went to put shuffle on. And just as I opened the curtain, the lights went out. Only those lights, and this hasn't happened before. The apartment had just been checked out by maintenance as well. I jumped out because I hate the dark and flicked the light switch and it came back on. I got back in the shower and there were no further issues. When I came out, I went for my towel and there was a hand towel on top of it folded neatly. Again, nothing malicious has happened, but I'm alone in the apartment right now and somewhat freaked out.
This has been going on for months, and it's freaking me out. Over the months, strange stuff has been happening while I'm trying to sleep. Every night, my bed will randomly shift, and my foot will feel like it's being crushed, as if something decided to take a seat on my bed and just watch me. I've heard whispers and sniffing as if the entity has a pet dog. I always feel like I'm being watched. My room is in the basement, and in this house, in the basement, the only thing that ever makes sound in the middle of the night are the pipes and the vents. There should be no reason for the washer changing settings, which can only be done by dials, or something smacking the water heater, loud enough for me to hear that sound, or even random stuff falling over or off shelves. I've lived in this room for 2 years now, and this only started 9 months or so ago. But the worst part happened yesterday. I suffer from paranoia, so these past months I just chalked it up to me being paranoid. Until yesterday at 10 AM, I got out of bed, got dressed, and after I got up the stairs to get breakfast, I heard a clear adult female voice from a few feet away saying, "Yay, he's awake." It couldn't have been my mum, because she was at her business, and she's the only woman living in the house. Screw that. No, I wasn't hallucinating. I never have before, and I was wide awake by the time I left my room, just like always. My family thinks I'm crazy, and haven't heard anything or seen anything since. Clearly she likes me. Why else would she be excited about me being awake? So she's not really a threat, at the moment at least, but it is still creepy. How do I get it to stop? It's freaking me out. I'm fine if she stays, so long as I get her to stop being so creepy. My friend told me that I should talk to her, but forget that. This is terrifying. What if I say something that makes her mad? I share a room with power tools and saws and stuff. She's most active at night. That one time at 10 AM was the only time she's done anything when it was bright out.
I'll try and keep this as short as possible, but around 10 years ago, my sister's dad passed away suddenly, and a few weeks after his death, weird things started happening. A few things I remember really well from that time period were my mom would take pictures and they would be blurred, and I remember one time it looked like she had black eyes and face bruises. Another time, there was a blue blur in the background that looked exactly like her ex who had passed. There was a side-by-side and you could instantly tell. Also, as a footnote, he was never abusive or violent towards her. Trying to be logical, we put it down to the camera was slow and she was just moving it too quick, causing blurs, and it was just a coincidence. Second weird thing I remember was that one evening, my mom said she knew he was around. Not really believing it, my sister said, "If you're here, make yourself known." And that exact moment, her laptop decided to freak out. Random letters and numbers were popping up on the screen, and then the laptop shut down. I remember crying my eyes out because I was scared. But again, trying to be logical, the laptop was old and probably had viruses. These things lasted for a couple of years, but I would say for the past 5 years, nothing major has happened, other than the feeling of being watched occasionally, but it's not uncomfortable. My sister, who had just graduated and moved out, came to visit my mom for the weekend, and my mom had to do a Zoom call. Nothing out of the ordinary, but when the call connected, her laptop screen went black and froze. When it unfroze and reconnected, it was about 30 seconds later. The person on the other end of the call asked, "Who was the man wearing the cap and sweater?" Even though it was just my mom and sister in the room. We all instantly thought of my sister's dad, as that's the kind of thing he would wear. He always wore a cap, and the only logical thing I can think of is that the call glitched to someone else's. So, I'm curious, assuming this is a ghost, is there a reason he came back? Is he trying to warn us about something? My granddad just got out of the hospital, but they weren't close with my sister's dad. Or is he just revisiting? I don't know much about ghosts, so I don't know if that's a thing. My mom has always stated that things that have happened don't make her scared, and the feelings of when he is around aren't uncomfortable or scary. They're just weird. So, I don't feel like he's trying to be scary or threatening in any way.
I've never been one to believe in ghosts, or most things that seem out of this world throughout my whole life. And to be honest, my memory of these nights I went through are very hazy, so everything may not be remembered correctly. But I'll just say exactly how I remember it, when I randomly get that gut feeling it gives me every now and then. It all started when a couple of buddies went hiking with me to an abandoned town called Lost Cove, located near Irwin, Tennessee. It was my third time making a trip up the mountain, but it was everyone in our group's first time camping there. It was me and my friends Zach, Jordan, Nick, and Creighton. Nothing too crazy happened during this trip itself, just some slightly creepy, off-putting vibes at night, which nothing came of until we decided to hunt for the graveyard on our way back down the mountain. It took us about an hour and a half to find it, and we only stayed for a few minutes to take some pictures because it was getting dark. All should have been well from just visiting how we did, but my theory is that I personally may have upset something at the town that wanted to follow me back because of it. The main two things I believe I could have done wrong is 1. Walk all over the graves taking a video of all of them. 2. While looking at the graveyard, I took a separate path which led me down a broken down hill with a closed wooden chest hidden near it. The chest had nothing special, just some very old tools. The specific one I took was a rusty saw blade which I carried most of the way back with me, but ditched it on the way back. Now that the backstory has been laid out, I can get to the actual ghost part of the story. So when I got back from the town, I was instantly getting some very strange vibes, that someone was always with me, watching me, especially at night when I was alone away from anyone else. I have 3 somewhat clouded memories of seeing this ghost, and every single one of them was through a reflection, and each time left me almost paralyzed, unable to move or scream. All I could let out was a very quiet, muffled yelp. I'm going to make it easier on myself and just break up each sighting individually. 1. The first sighting I can remember was in my small room at my old house, which is where all of this occurred at. All I can remember of this one was being slightly on edge while playing PC all night, double-taking my window over my shoulder, because I kept feeling a presence behind me. Eventually, I grew tired of it and just decided to try and go to sleep. But when I was going to fall asleep, I noticed I left my blinds up, so I walked over to close them and stared in the reflection of the light my window was causing. What I can remember is seeing a woman with a look of terrifying joy on her face. My first reaction was to show some form of dominance towards it, so I remember flipping it off, staring at it angrily like I wanted to kill it, but all it did was stare directly through my eyes into me as a whole and laugh. While it laughed, it struck so much fear into me, I backed down immediately and just tried to let out the most primal scream I could muster up, but nothing came out except what I can best describe as a passionate whimper. This was essentially all I remember of the first sighting. The second sighting I remember was also what I believe to be the same night as the first. I finally managed to fall asleep after the first sighting, but woke up to night terrors and walked over to my parents' bathroom instead of the one next to my room, because it was being worked on at the time as we were getting ready to sell our house and move soon. This interaction was essentially the same, except this time I saw it in my parents' mirror. Me and the spirit had essentially the same back and forth interaction as the last. The final night, I can remember this was at least a week after the first time I saw it. At the time, I was living in my frog, or finished room over garage, because our floors were being stained, and the frog was one of the only rooms that was not being stained because it had vinyl flooring. Also, my only way in and out of this room was by ladder, because it was on the second story, and if I opened the door leading into the master bedroom, the chemicals from the floor stain would flood the room. This particular detail made this night that much worse. The moment I saw the figure in the reflection was when I was midway through binging an Avatar: The Last Airbender episode on Netflix. This was around the time that they dropped the full series on Netflix, and everyone was very hype about it. I saw the figure after I stood up to turn the lights off and close the blinds on the window, as I was about to go to sleep after the next episode. Of course, when I went to close the blinds, there was the face staring right at me, just smiling at me. I remember being paralyzed again, only able to open and close my eyes. This left me frustrated after not seeing this thing for weeks. It randomly pops up as I'm trapped in this room, with my only way out being a ladder into the dark. So, me being the wuss I am, as soon as I was able to move, I closed my eyes, got the blinds closed, climbed into bed, and forced myself to relax and fall asleep. I moved to Florida shortly after that last sighting, and never saw it again. But I still felt like I was being watched, or got that cold shiver feeling that made me feel like someone was right behind me.